ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ सदाशिवसमारम्भां शङ्कराचार्यमध्यमाम् अस्मदाचार्यपर्यन्तां वन्दे गुरुपरम्पराम्। ॐ गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णु गुरुर्देवो महेश्वराः गुरुः साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ सरस्वती नमस्तुभ्यां वरदे कामरूपिणि विद्यारम्भं करिष्यामि सिद्धिर्भवतु मे सदा। कार्पण्यदोषोपहतः स्वभावः पृच्छामि त्वां धर्मसम्मूढचेताः। यश्रेयस्यान्निश्चितं ब्रूहि तन्मे शिष्यस्तेऽहं शाधि मां त्वां प्रपन्नम्। ॐ वाङ्मे मनसि प्रतिष्ठिता मनो मे वाचि प्रतिष्ठितम् आविराविर्म एधि वेदस्य मा आनिष्ठः श्रुतं मे मा प्रहासिः। अनेन अधीतेन अहोरात्रान् सन्दधामि ऋतं वदिष्यामि सत्यं वदिष्यामि तन्मा अवतु तद्वक्तारम् अवतु अवतु माम् अवतु वक्तारम् अवतु वक्तारम्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयामदेवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः स्तुष्टुवाग्भं सस्तनूभिः वशेम देवहितं यदायुः। स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति न पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्ठनेमि स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ अहं वृक्षस्य रेरिव कीर्तिं पृष्ठं गिरेरिव ऊर्ध्वा पवित्रो वाजनीव स्वामृतम् अस्मि द्रविणत्वं सवर्चसं सुमेधा अमृतोषितः इति त्रिशङ्कोर्वेदानुवचनम्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Very, very well done, Nana. Very good addition. Okay, so we're starting with chapter 7 in today's class. We'll start reading this, but just to give you a context, right? Now, this is the start of Bhakti Yoga. Now, what we have done here so far, right, in the first 6 chapters, in this entire new sextet here, the next 6 chapters, Bhagwanji is now going to reveal his true nature. Okay, and what is important to remember is that why is he talking about it now, right? Because Arjun is no longer the Arjun of chapter 2, the chapter 1 who was full of Vishad Yoga, right? And he was full of his intellect was so gross. After that, he went from Vishad Yoga. Bhagwanji first gave him the Tattva Gyan through Sankhya Yoga. Sabse pehle he gave him the biggest, like this is the truth, this is the reality, right? He went directly into the heart of the matter first. And after that, he started to talk about the implementation aspects of the Sankhya Yoga. So then he started talking about Karma Yoga, chapter 3. For Arjuna, he took Arjun through Karma Yoga. Then in chapter 4, he took Arjun through what is true renunciation look like, the Karma Sannyas Yoga, right? So we did that. After that, he went to chapter 5, where he learned how to give up the sense of doership in an action. So first was giving up sense of attachment to the results of the action, which is the true renunciation, and then taking it even forward, how do we give up a sense of doership in the action? And finally, he took us through the Dhyan Yoga, the entire practice of meditation, and how you can be meditative at all points of time. You don't do meditation, but how to be meditative at all points of time through all activities that we do. Right now, through this entire journey, now Arjuna, his intellect and his mind has become a lot more sukshma, a lot more subtle. So what does that really mean? It means that he is now ready to understand the deeper secrets. I mean, Bhagwanji, if he had given this set of secret in chapter 2, he just didn't have the equipments, right? That there would have been no way for him to even perceive or understand. So what we have been doing through these first 6 chapters as Arjunas, we have been calibrating our equipment so that this equipment can now start to track smaller and smaller and subtler changes in the experiment. If we did not have the right equipment, then we can't perceive things, right? That's the problem. Like there is ultraviolet radiation. With our eyes are just not tuned. They are not the right equipment to be able to see ultraviolet rays. Our ears are not the right equipment to hear ultrasound. Correct. Similarly, but if you have, and there are so many other frequencies in the world around us that we cannot perceive with the gross senses that we have. So what do? You want to tune into something, you have a radio, you have a television, and then you have to turn things around, you have to tune it so that the equipment, the instrument that you have can tune into the right frequency. As soon as you tune into the right frequency, immediately the station gets picked up, right? And then immediately what was completely inaudible to us, which was completely unperceivable to us, it becomes audible, it becomes perceivable. You can see things on TV, you can hear things on radio or on TV. Correct. So it isn't as if like that content wasn't there in the atmosphere before, or it wasn't available to us. It was available at all points of time. It's just that we did not have the right tools or to connect to that. Or even if we had the right tools, we hadn't turned it around, we hadn't tuned it to catch into that frequency as yet. So over last 6 chapters, Bhagwanji has helped Arjun, he has helped all of us to fine tune ourselves, to tune into a new frequency, so that the new language he speaks now, the new information he gives to us, the new secrets he reveals to us, our equipment is now sukshma enough to be able to tune into that knowledge. That is why the Bhakti Yoga starts here, okay, and where he will reveal to us the true nature of his self. Now, while this entire sextet has been called the Bhakti Yoga, the fun part is that he's going to talk about the real bhakti as we understand it only in the last chapter of this, right? 7 to 12. Oh, it's only 12th chapter that he starts talking about bhakti. Why? Because Bhagwanji is way smarter than all of us, right? And he understands us inside out. Even whether we understand ourselves or not, he understands us. And he understands how our evolution is supposed to happen. So being completely gross, Parth, we started off as Parth, the son of Prithvi. Son of Prithvi is who? Completely hard, right? It is Prithvi. The Prithvi is the grossest form of all elements in this world, right? That is our starting point of journey, right? At that point of time, he knew that the only thing that will connect to us is what we can see. For us, what we see, what we touch, what is tangible is real to us in this moment. So he starts out with tangible conversations, right? First, he gives us the Tattva Gyan in chapter 2, and then he starts to take us through a journey which will allow us to learn through things we touch, we feel, we see. So Karma Yoga is all about VVGP and how we interact with VVGP, how we behave with VVGP, how we behave with the tangible world around us, right? And now he knows even the Arjuna who has completed chapter 6 is still not ready for bhakti, right? For that reverence to come in, for that faith to get built up, there is still many more steps to take. There is still a lot of perception, a lot of gyan that needs to come to us, and we still need to experiment a lot to experience it. And naturally, through that experience, faith and reverence will develop, and he will lead us to that. Okay, so chapter 7 is Gyan Vigyan Yog. Gyan Vigyan means Gyan in the language here uses direct perception and total perception. So Gyan, direct perception, is basically, if I have to break it down in our school language, it would be knowledge theory. So you go into your class, you read a book, there is a theory that is given. So if you were in physics or chemistry class, you would read the theory behind something. And then within the book itself, they will teach you, okay, now this is the theory, this is the experiment that you need to do to see this theory in action, right? Theory is gravity. This is how gravity works. This is the nature of gravity. This is the way gravity works. Okay, this is the nature of the force itself, where it originates from. That is your theory. Practical is you experience gravity. So the practical would be take a ball and throw it down. Just leave it. Where does it go? It falls down because of gravity. That is an experiment. Okay, then there are so many other experiments that you do and you start to experience that theory in your life, right? So there is theory, there is practical implementation. Through the practical, you experience it. Once you experience it, it becomes a part of us. Then that knowledge, what was theoretical and intellectual with the theory, becomes experiential knowledge. So then you don't just believe. Belief is at the Gyan level. Knowing is at the experiential level. So Gyan is for you to believe, okay, this theory, this is how it is, this is how the world works. And then you experiment it, then you know it, then it becomes experiential. Right? Then nobody else has to like convince you of anything because you're convinced, you've seen it in action, right? That is the Gyan and Vigyan yoga. Yeah. Another important thing is that the Gyan, what is the quality of Gyan that we are trying to learn here? The Gyan that will be given to us in the next 6 chapters it's of the highest quality. So there are different qualities to the Gyan also. So when we go to school, we learn so many subjects, right? That's also Gyan. We get Gyan of chemistry, physics, maths, all of this is Gyan, right? We learn certain skill sets, that's also Gyan. How to be in the world, what are the social mores, that is also Gyan, right? But the difference between that knowledge and the knowledge we will learn here, it's very different. The quality is different because the Gyan of the material world that you gain, the knowledge of the material world that you gain can never become you. You acquire that knowledge from outside. So there is a subject or object of knowledge. There is you as a knower. And then between the two of you is the knowledge. Once you acquire this knowledge, the knower starts to understand the object of knowledge. I gather the knowledge of swimming. I gather the knowledge of law. So I can, so you never become a swimmer. You do not become a doctor. You don't become a lawyer. These become certain things that you do, the skills that you acquire, or the roles that you can take on. So you can be a lawyer when you are in the court or when you're arguing for your client or you're helping your client, but that's not you. It is not your identity. It's a role that you take on. Swimming is something, you are a swimmer when you are in the action of swimming. It doesn't become you. You are in the act of swimming. You have the knowledge. So you are acquiring knowledge, right? So this is the material world knowledge. But the para knowledge, the param knowledge, the sattvic knowledge, the sattvic gyan that we are getting in this chapter, the gyan that is being referred to here, is of the quality that once you acquire this gyan and you experience this gyan through vigyan, when it becomes experiential knowledge, not just at the intellectual level, when it transcends into experiential knowledge, then there remains no distinction between the knower, the object of knowledge, and the knowledge itself. They all merge into one. This is a very special aspect of this special knowledge. You become that knowledge. It is, if I have to give a small example of connected back to meditation, when we had learned about systems of meditation in last class, we had also talked about contemplative meditation, right? So contemplative meditation says that you become what you contemplate on, or you manifest what you contemplate on. Okay, so this knowledge, when you contemplate on it, you become that. When you contemplate on compassion, you embody compassion. Okay, that is the quality of this gyan. That's so special about this gyan that we will get in this. Okay, and the focus will not just be on getting the gyan. The bigger focus is on vigyan, the experience of it. But we can't get to vigyan without gyan. So gyan is the important first step, but very incomplete if we stop there. It has to transcend into experiential knowledge, without which it is really of no use. Yeah? So let's start reading. Sanchita, will you read with us? Before we start a new chapter, just repeat after me. We'll speak 2 lines and then you start reading the introduction. Okay? Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha.
Om Shri Paramatmane Namaha.
अथ सप्तमो अध्यायः.
Ato Saptama Adhyaya.
अध्यायः. Yeah, so this is the starting of chapter 7, Saptami chapter. Let's start reading.
Jnana Vijnana Yoga, the yoga of direct perception and total perception. Introduction. Traditionally, the Holy Gita is divided into 3 parts, each consisting of 6 chapters. A brief account of each such sextet is given below. First sextet, Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. In the first chapter of the first sextet, the subject matter of the Holy Gita was introduced under the name of the Yoga of Arjuna's Melancholy, which would be dealt with in detail in the succeeding chapters. In the beginning of the second chapter, the Lord explained the Sankhya Yoga, and in subsequent shlokas, he briefly touched on the subject of Karma Yoga. The whole of the third chapter was devoted to Karma Yoga. In the fourth chapter, the Lord explained the culmination of Karma Yoga in renunciation of the outcome of actions, that is Karma Sannyasa, along with its blossoming forth into direct perception of reality, that is Jnana. The fifth chapter was devoted totally to renunciation of the sense of doership in actions, and the sixth chapter contained a full discussion on the subject of meditation as a necessary input in any discipline. Thus, the main discussion in this sextet revolves around a karma yogi, and hence this sextet is named the sextet of the yoga of action. Second sextet, Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. In this sextet, the Lord would unravel the mystery of his own sentient identity and that also of insentient nature, which is infused by his power. Devotion to the Lord is the best means of counteracting the mischief played by the supposition that creation, being tangible, is real. The 12th chapter in the last chapter of this sextet and it contains a full discussion on Bhakti Yoga or the Yoga of devotion. Hence, this sextet is called Sextet of the Yoga of Devotion. Third sextet, Jnana Yoga, the Yoga of direct perception. Here, all the subjects dealt with in the first 2 sextets have been fully discussed, with a view to leading the aspirant to direct perception, and so this sextet is named as the sextet of the yoga of direct perception. Direct perception or jnana, total perception or vijnana, and non-perception or ajnana. As explained in the concluding shlokas of the second chapter, the illumination of the inner self as a result of the comprehension of the glory of the Supreme Self as Brahman is called direct perception. The power of the Supreme Self called Maya creates an illusion whereby it appears to manifest the indivisible, unified divinity in diverse forms and shapes. The cognition of its function and of the process leading to the diversification is called total perception. The attribution of reality in this illusory world of names and forms is called non-perception or ignorance. This ignorance can be removed by direct perception or total perception. Hence, the 7th chapter is called the Yoga of Direct Perception Jnana and Total Perception Vijnana.
So this is a lot of information that's just been read, uh, right? But I think Tuvina has already given introduction on the various sextets. But the one thing I wanted to highlight is after when Arjun came to Krishna, he was in a confused state of mind. He was very unhappy. He wasn't sure what to do next, right? So after Bhagwanji first revealed the Tattva Gyan, reminding him of his true nature, which is not the body but the soul, he went on to first explain to him how to do your job. Duty karna hai, and this is the way you go about doing your duty. So the advice he gave Arjun, just like the advice we would give our friends, is very practical. When a person is confused and in a state of bother, right? Just do this, and the work will get done. So Bhagwanji did exactly the same thing.
Symptomatic, correct.
Very,
symptomatic treatment needs to be given first. Agar bukhar hai, you're suffering from fever, first thing to do is कि यार बुखार कम करो, right? Give a paracetamol. Uske baad you'll figure out what's going on in the background, right? So practical advice. Sorry.
Correct. So he's gave the practical advice to give up the results, gave up practical advice to give up doership, get your ego in control. Then Arjun asked the question, but you're asking me to give up my senses and control my mind, but it's so hard. And so he says, get into meditation.
Abhyas yoga, practice.
Yeah, right. And then in this chapter, which is the first chapter of Bhakti Yoga, he's talking about direct perception and total perception, right? Like Tuvina explained, direct perception is the knowledge. So Arjun's already got a taste of some of that knowledge in the principles that he has highlighted as part of the first 6 chapters, right? Total perception is the practical implementation of that knowledge. Now, Bhagwanji knows, just like all of us, we know what the right thing to do is most of the time. But when we are in the warlike situation, we go back to our old habits because our belief is not strong enough. So the bridge between direct perception and total perception is the belief. So I'll give you an example, right? Which is why it comes under Bhakti Yoga. So I'll give you an example. The only example coming to my head is that of food. But so suppose someone's never tasted honey, okay? And you've tasted honey, but the
Give the example of milk. I thought your example of milk was pretty.
Okay. So someone's never tasted milk, and you've tasted milk. So the first step is, boss, you should drink milk. Like, why? He's just like, oh, it's just, boss, it's so different. Milk is like, what is it like? It's like water, it's liquid. Oh, but I drink water, so it's like, is it like water? You're like, no, it's like liquid, but it's slightly creamy in flavor. It is white in color. It has this aftertaste, which is great. And unlike water, it actually fills your stomach. And you can give the knowledge about milk to the other person, right? Now, for that other person to drink milk, what does it take? 2 things. Either they fully believe what in you. Sanchita told me milk is good. I trust Sanchita implicitly. So I will do it. Sanchita ne bola, I will do it. I will try it. So there's a belief there. There is that trust. And the second part is you look at the knowledge that has been shared, and then you believe that, oh, milk would be healthy, milk would be good, it would be creamy, it would be tasty, it will fill my tummy. You believe this knowledge to be true, so you go and take that first sip of milk. So this is a very simple example or a dummified example of direct perception and total perception, but it's exactly the same for the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, but then to take that thing forward, right? Ultimately, when you drink milk is the only time when you experience milk, right? Until then, it was just a bunch of intellectual information. Like it's white in color, it's slightly sweetish, it's creamy, it's this, it's that. All of that is external features. You just know it as a characteristic. When you drink it is when the only time you know, oh, this is what is milk. No matter what somebody will tell you will never be able to really know what it is like until you experience it. Once you've experienced it, it becomes total perception. Okay.
Right.
And it is still not total perception because the example here has its inherent limitation of being a material example, right? When you experience something more, something that's closer to God, like a sense of compassion or kindness, right? When you experience it yourself in a certain situation, that's when you become it, is the total perception of it. Basically, you absorb that knowledge. Every part of you understands what it means to be compassionate and how that expresses itself in its world. And you will realize that compassion, once you become compassion, you will realize that compassion expresses itself in hundreds of sometimes very different looking ways. Sometimes compassion can be expressed as listening. Sometimes compassion expresses itself in a harsher form where you restrain somebody from doing something that is bad for them out of compassion, because you understand that they are not in a state that they can do this themselves. I have to do this for them to control them from further harming themselves. So the actions itself may look a little bit harsh when you're restraining someone, but it is out of compassion that you're doing it. So compassion, while like, but you know all of these things only when you have understood it completely in a total perception manner.
So the experience of that knowledge is what makes the difference, right? So Bhagavan is given all this advice, all these principles, the way to do things in the first 6 chapters. In this line, it's written that the power of the Supreme Self called Maya creates an illusion whereby it appears to manifest the indivisible, the unified divinity in diverse forms and shapes, right? So our only way of experiencing total perception is by engaging in these diverse forms and shapes. It means engaging with the VVGP, our circumstances, our object, to find the indivisible, the unified divinity. Right? But to do that, we need to have faith. So this chapter talks about building that faith, because you can implement what he's saying. You will do it for 4 days, 5 days, maybe you, and then some situation will come which will push you back to your old habit. Or you'll implement it for 5 days and you're like, oh, I don't feel that much better. Again, you're going back to body level.
Yeah. So to take example of milk that Abhinav gave, right, for that belief. So now you've experienced it. You know what milk is, what it tastes like, all of that, right? But still there is an element of belief that drinking milk will lead to good health. Okay, it will get me calcium, it will get me this. But will that change start happening on day one? Day one, you drink milk and you say, hey, I'm not feeling whatever, ABCD. It doesn't happen on day one, right? It takes time for milk to get transformed and for the benefits to accumulate over a period of time for it to start showing up in your gross body. Correct? So there is a belief that if I keep drinking milk in a certain fashion at certain points of time in a certain way, then it will lead to the benefits. That is the belief. But as we said, Bhakti Yoga, even though it's called Bhakti Yoga, the chapter for Bhakti is chapter 12. It's the last chapter. Bhakti means what? Faith and reverence. Faith and reverence is not something that you need to cultivate. It will automatically cultivate as a side product as total perception starts to dawn on us. Once you experience the Mahamaya of this world, Once you know how big and how amazing, how unbelievably amazing and loving this universe is, and what is the greatness of Bhagwanji is, you will naturally have feeling of reverence and faith. Now, Bhagwanji knows that in first 6 chapters, you have reached a point where your equipment, your upkaran, antahkaran and bahya everything is now become sukshma enough. It has become subtle enough for you to start absorbing deeper tenets. Right now, we're going to remove the first layer. The karma yoga is done. Let's go down and see the mechanics of working. That's where that's the gyan that will reveal. Okay, I've told you all of this works. Why does it work? What are the principles behind this machinery? Let's start looking at that. So that is what we will deeper delve into. Why do those principles work and how do they work? So that is the gyan. But then again, we have to get to really experience that gyan, we have to get to vigyan. So the specific gyan, that's the example that's given here. What is the gyan that we will get is, what is the greatness of the Lord? How he really is? What is his true nature? Okay, that's the gyan that we will get, but not at the deepest level. The deepest level come in the 3rd chapter. In 2nd chapter, you will basically get the principles, and then you will also understand how, and then that is your gyan. Then vigyan is maya, understanding maya, which is his manifestation. Why do we get deluded by maya? How to avoid being deluded by maya? How to find that indivisible whole within seemingly disparate and completely separate things? How do I look at water and know that in the background it is H and O in a specific way, that it has been put together? Unless I have done that experiment, otherwise it will always seem to me that that doesn't seem true. H and hydrogen and oxygen are 2 gases. They look so different. And you're telling me this water with all its different characteristics is actually created out of hydrogen and oxygen? That makes no sense, right? So the knowledge is, it is created from H and O in a specific format. You get 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen, put it under pressure in a certain specific pressure zone, it gets converted into liquid, it becomes water, and its characteristics completely change. Hydrogen is extremely, it can create a lot of different things, right? So hydrogen has different characteristics, oxygen has different characteristics, and water has completely different characteristics. We do an experiment, then we see every time you will look at water, you will say, oh yeah, this is hydrogen and oxygen put together. You will also understand why is this entire world of diversity that we see around us is end of the day created with what? 109 elements, your periodic table. 109 elements create this entire physical diversity, right? As far as chemistry is concerned. It's similar to that we'll learn. And we'll start to see things. You look at marble, oh, marble is calcium. Calcium is what? You've got, you know what calcium is created out of, right? What are the elements behind it? That practical understanding. But not knowing that at all and working with this, oh, marble is different, coal is different, coal is not the same as carbon, I will deal with coal separately, coal is very different, carbon is different, knowing all of that. And diamond is also carbon. Oh, but no, you don't recognize that fact. You recognize that you will recognize diamond just for what it is at the surface level. That is being deluded, not knowing what lies behind it. That is ignorance, agyan. So this is the difference between agyan, gyan, and vigyan. Yeah. Let's go to the next shloka, first shloka. Kakuli, you'll read with us? Connection?
With a view to clarifying the fundamentals of direct perception and total perception, the Lord says,
Shri Bhagavanu Vacha
Shri Bhagavanu Vacha
Maya Saktamana Partha
Maya Saktamana Partha
Yogam Yunjanam Adashtrayaha
Yogam Yunjunamadarshrayaha
Asamshayam Samagram Mam
असंशयं समग्रम्
यथा न्यास्यसि तच्छृणु
यथा न्यस्यसि तच्छृणु.
Maya is in me. Mai in me. Asakt manaha. Manaha is mind and asakt is asakti, attached. Attached. So your mind which is attached to me, attached or attentive to me. Parth is reference to Arjun. Yogam, yoga of meditation. Here specifically says yoga of meditation. So meditation meaning what? You're constantly contemplating on the Lord whenever you're doing anything through the entire day. Right? So meditating on Lord through everything that you do. Yunjanam adashrayah is आश्रय लेना किसी का. आश्रय लेना meaning to be enshrined in his being. Asamshayam is without any doubt, full conviction. Samagram is one who is full of all the qualities. So qualities like Aishwarya, Dharm, stuff like that, right? So one that is full of all the qualities. Mam, mujhko, me. Nyasyasi is can know or comprehend. Tat shrunu, tat that, shrunu is listen. Then we'll read the second one as well. Jnanam teham savijnanam
ज्ञानं तेहं सविज्ञानम्
idam vakshyama sheshatah
इदं वक्षसमे शेषहत
idam vakshyama sheshatah
इदं वक्षं यशेषहत
sheshatah
शेषतः
yajnatva neha bhuyonya yajnatva neha bhuyonyaj
यज्ञत्वा नेह भूयो न्यज न्यज
ज्ञातव्यं वशिष्यते.
ज्ञातव्यं वशिष्यते.
Jnanam is true knowledge. Teham, te for you, aham me. Savidnyanam is with vigyan. Idam this, vakshyam will say, asheshatah fully, completely. Yaj gyatva, knowing which. Na neham, na iham, not in this world. Iham is reference to this world. Bhuyo is then, anya, anything else. Gyatavyam, worth knowing. Avishishyate is remains.
The Lord said, O Partha, with your mind lovingly attentive to me, practicing the yoga of meditation, and with your being enshrined in me, listen to my words so that you may comprehend me fully with conviction. I shall impart to you fully this knowledge of direct perception along with that of total perception, after imbibing which there remains nothing else to be known.
So the one thing I do that I find interesting here is in the very first line, he says, O Partha, with your mind lovingly attentive to me. Out here, he's not asking for attention. He's asking for love. And he's asking for our love. Just like the way our kids love us unconditionally when they're born, right? And I think we've shared this example in the past as well, that even if you're really upset with your child and you are yelling and all of those things, all that child wants to do is love you. And they want to hug you and they kiss you, and all they do is express love. And even as adults, we love love. We love to express it. We love to receive it. Because we know that is the connection, that bhav is the taste of that connection to Bhagwan Ji. We chase love, we practice being compassionate, we practice being loving, because we know that is that rope that will connect us to Bhagwan Ji, the more loving we are. And that's why we all chase love. That's why we all want to be loved. Because that's the form we have to be in to connect to Bhagwan Ji. And that's why this entire section is called Bhakti Yoga. It's Bhakti may have a lot of connotations given where India is and all these other things we get exposed to. But in the Gita, in the truest sense, it's love. It's faith which is filled with love for Bhagwan Ji. Yeah. Sorry, please continue.
Capability for direct perception of divinity along with total perception. In this shloka, the Lord explains the qualities which make a person capable of comprehending the glory of the supreme divinity. He points out three necessary qualities. 1. Unbounded love for divinity. Ordinarily, a person entertains high hopes of getting happiness from worldly objects, but even a glimpse of divinity creates an upsurge of unbounded love for it. Then happiness is solicited only from divinity, and no object of the world is allowed to obtrude in that happiness. Such a devotee has been called a person lovingly attentive to him. 2. Being enshrined in him. The person who is completely confident of attaining spiritual advancement by dependence on the Lord, no matter which particular discipline is followed, has been called as being enshrined in him. 3. Practicing the yoga of meditation. Having complete faith in the kindness of the Lord and meditating while pursuing any discipline has been called practicing the yoga of meditation. A person having the above mentioned qualities has been described as possessing the capability for direct perception of the divinity. In the second shloka, the Lord says,
1 second, right? So the above mentioned qualities are the requirements for having the capability for direct perception of divinity, right? So before you can perceive it, you have to have the capability, which is what we've been talking about. You need to have the right equipments. If you don't have the right equipment to measure or visualize or hear ultrasound, you won't be able to, or ultrasonic sound, or be able to visualize ultraviolet waves. Unless you have the right equipment, you cannot measure it, you cannot perceive it, correct? So that is what is being told here, that the three things being talked about are the ways to calibrate our equipment so that we can tune into his frequency. And once we tune into his frequency, we will be able to see him, we will be able to hear him. So these are the three things we need to do to create in ourselves a patrata. In Hindi, they call it patrata. आपकी पात्रता होनी चाहिए भगवान जी की ग्रेस, अनुकंपा, अनुग्रह उनका रिसीव करने के लिए. So this is the capability we develop. So what? Unbounded love for divinity. And unbounded love for divinity means what? From Karma Yoga we have learned what? Unbounded love for all of his creation, the entire VVGP. Constantly viewing life as being rigged in your favor. There is nothing that is wrong. Everything that happens is a blessing or a lesson and is only meant to move us one step forward towards him, one step forward towards Sat Chit Anand. Everything is meant for that. So life is rigged in our favor, and being able to perceive that. Being enshrined in him, that means having that complete faith that if I do the steps that have been told to me, then I will reach that path. So having complete faith in the path. And practicing the yoga of meditation. Again, meditation not as an act of meditation, but as a state of being, completely connected with him. You're looking at water, knowing that it is in the background. It is in the background, hydrogen and oxygen, right? That form of meditative being. Okay, these are the three things required.
A person having the above mentioned in the second shloka, the Lord says that along with direct perception of divinity, it is necessary to have total perception of the processes of nature, which manifest the indivisible, unified reality in diverse forms of creation. Those who are not willing to comprehend the glory of divinity become dominated completely by the illusory powers of nature. Taking the unreal to the real, they have to undergo endless suffering due to their own delusion. This is why the Lord points out that having experienced direct perception as well as total perception, one would know the secrets of divinity as also those of nature. After acquiring this knowledge, nothing more would remain to be known, and the perplexities of human life would cease to have any effect.
So that is the last point here is very important, right? This is the crux of what Gita always says, or our Sanatana Dharma always says. Look inwards for all secrets. If you know yourself, you will know the world outside. This world is a hologram. Every smallest component of this world reflects the entire world. So if we understand the laws of the universe that govern us, that govern how we are, our being, if we understand our true nature, we would have the gyan to understand the complexity, the seeming complexity outside of us. If you understand the nature of the 109 periodic elements, your ability to understand, chemically speaking, the world outside is very easy. If you understand the basic equations of maths well, then it doesn't matter how complicated the math problem is going to be. Ultimately, it comes down to your ability to implement those 30 equations that you've learned, because they are the building blocks. If you understand A to Z, then you can read and write any word in English in this world, right? So that is what is being talked about, that once you know the basic secrets, the basic gyan, then you will also not just know the secrets of divinity, you will also know that of nature, because nature is built on the same set of universal principles. So that's why he said that once you know this gyan, there's nothing else that needs to be known. That is the nature of this gyan. Know this gyan, and then imbibing this direct perception, total perception, after which there is nothing else that remains to be known. Because now you've understood the basic principles. Now you can go and apply it and create any form of complexity. Yeah. We'll go to Shloka 3. Smita, will you read with us?
Hi, sure.
So did you cover the Sar?
Go ahead, Smita.
Okay. Here a word of caution is sounded by the Lord. He says,
Manushyanam sahasreshu
Manushyanam sahasreshu
kaschidyatati siddhaye
Kaschidyadati siddhaye
yatamapi siddhanam
Yatatamapi siddhanam
kaschinmam vetti tattvataha.
Kaschinmam veti tattvataha.
Manushyanam, in human beings, sahasreshu, thousands, kaschidyati, barely one, siddhaye, realizes me, yatatamapi, yatat, to do, to strive, to work hard towards something. Api, even in them. Siddhanam, among the siddhas, the realized ones. Siddhas are the realized ones. Kaschin mam, rarely one. Veti, understands. Tattvataha, essential nature. Tattvagyan, essential nature, the true nature.
Hardly one person among thousands make any effort to realize me. Even among those who strive successfully, rarely does one know my essential being. Perception of reality extremely scarce. It is commonly believed that whatever viewpoint is upheld by the majority would be right. This principle may hold true in some measure in regard to worldly conduct and management of affairs, but it does not apply to the spiritual field. In a majority of persons, there is a firm belief that phenomenal world is real. Whatever can be experienced by the senses is taken to be real and the rest to be imaginary. If they pause for a moment and give serious thought to facts, they would immediately realize that whatever appears to be reality at the present moment would be nothing more than merely a memory after a few moments.
So just before we continue, right, this entire shloka, read it also from the perspective of the importance of satsang, who we choose to spend our time with. Because the world around us, the way it is created, and the diversity that exists, if we seek advice, we seek opinion from the wrong source, we could very easily choose to believe that the world is real, ye sab bakwas hai, right? And there are enough number of people that feel and strongly believe that, and you could get into those situations where you're having that argument or conversation. This shloka is trying to highlight, choose your satsang. We are already in that blessed path where we have access to the ultimate knowledge through the book, right? So while you look around the world, while you interact and engage, our job is to come back to this book for our sadhana, for our practice, for us to figure out how to implement this knowledge. Our job is to come back to this book. Around in the world, that's why people always say, right, that you have to be very wise who you choose to be your guru. And that this is the reason why. Sorry, please continue.
Sure. This fact about things phenomenal may appear somewhat awesome and also incredible, and so people generally decide to go the way others are going. Such persons abound in the world, and so in this shloka, the Lord raises a finger of caution. He says that hardly one amongst a thousand strives for perfection, and among the many who strive, rarely does anyone realize him. This stark truth might cause frustration in certain minds, but if examined closely, there is no cause for any frustration. On the contrary, this declaration is, in fact, highly encouraging. In a way, it holds out an assurance that one who strives for perfection ultimately achieves success. It has merely been declared clearly in the 6th chapter that a person who seriously strives for realization achieves success in this life, failing which an opportunity is afforded to achieve success in the next life.
So
an example,
again, the thing to that stands out for me here is the word strive for perfection, right? And out here, perfection doesn't mean the perfection that we tend to have a connotation with from a material world where things need to be perfect. Like the result, where the result needs to be perfect. If the result is not perfect, I'm not good enough, or we didn't do good enough, right? That's how we typically look at the word perfection.
Or even action. Perfection and action is another thing that we look at. If the result is not perfect, then we go back to checking, where did my action or my process falter? Which is the right thing to do from a retrospective. Nobody's saying that you shouldn't do that. That's a perfectly right thing to do.
So,
but the perfection here is
the perfection here is the commitment
Yeah.
to attaining self-realization. That is the meaning of perfection. Okay? The words written here are one amongst 1,000 strive for perfection. This essentially means if Bhagwanji was saying it's a very difficult route, the way he would say it, 1,000 strive for it, but only one attain it. And then you'd be like, Arey, it's a very arduous task.
Very correct.
Right? But out here he's saying only one amongst 1,000 is even aware to then put the commitment to the journey. And what is then highlighted is if you put that commitment, the result can be achieved in this life itself. No questions asked. So all Bhagwanji is asking from us in this shloka is commitment. And I think the next analogy is beautiful. So it will help you clarify this further.
An example would clarify the position. In a rose bush, the leaves, thorns, and stalks together weigh about 5 to 6 kg, but the flowers in the entire shrub would hardly weigh 500 grams. The rose bush, however, is grown only for roses it yields, and the leaves, thorns, and stalks nourish, safeguard, and hold the flowers. Even after out of 500 grams of flowers, hardly 10 grams of essence can be extracted. Even though the rose bush is grown for its flowers and the essence, the leaves, thorns, and the stalks are extremely necessary for yielding flowers. The flowers thrive on account of them. Similarly, realization of divinity is the fragrance of human life, bearing no quantitative proportion to men and things.
Vijay, will you read with us?
The Lord explains the two classification of his nature. Insentient or subordinate, apara, and sentient or superior, para.
I'll share my screen.
Let's go to the explanation first.
Am I audible?
Yes. हाँ मैं करूँगी.
Yes.
Okay, fine. भूमिरापो नलो वायुः
Bhuvirapo nalo vavayuhu
खं मनो बुद्धिरेव च
kammano buddhirevacha
अहंकार इति यं मे
ahamkara iti yamme
भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा.
binna prakritish sattada.
Bhumi is earth. Our Rapu here is water. Anal is fire. Vayu, wind. Kham, akash. Mano, man. Buddhi, intellect. Ev, also. Cha, and. Ahankar, ego. Iti yam, iti ayam, like this, these. May, mine. Bhinna, different. Prakritir ashtadha, eightfold prakriti, eightfold nature. Okay, so we'll read the next one also. Apareyam, just 1 second, okay. Apare mitastvanyam, yeah. Apareya mitastvanyam.
Apareya mitastvanyam
Prakritim vidhi me param.
prakritim vidhi me param
Jiva bhuta mahabaho.
jiva bhuta mahabahu
Yayedam dharayate jagat.
yayedam dharaye jagat.
So aparam is insentient nature. Iyam, this. Itaha, from this. Anyam, different. Prakritim, nature. Vidhi, no. Me, mine. Param, sentient. Jeev Bhutam is the life element. Mahabaho is reference to Arjun. Yayedam, जिससे यह संपूर्ण है, मतलब with which, with this entire, that's the meaning of that word. Dharyate, sustains. Jagat, world.
My eightfold Prakriti, nature, comprises of my eightfold Prakriti, nature comprises of earth, water, fire, and ether, typifying solid nature, liquid state, energy, gaseous state, and space respectively. Mind, thinking faculty, intellect, determining faculty, and ego, distinguishing faculty.
Go ahead.
This is my insentient, subordinate nature, O brave one. Different from this is my sentient, superior nature, which as the essential life element sustains this creation. The eightfold insentient nature. Let us first take up the insentient nature. This comprises of 8 constituents mentioned in Shloka 4. The subtle forms of 5 gross constituents. The tanmatras may be included in them. Thus, these 5 constituents may be tabulated in the following form, denote the physical creation.
Okay. So this is something that we had read earlier as well in the first 6 chapters, the modification or in creation. Okay. So you all can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
okay.
this in your book, no, this is 1 page before chapter 1 in the new Bhagavad Gita book. I think.
Yes, that only it's the same picture that I'm showing.
Just in case they're taking notes.
Okay. So yeah, so this is part of the book. Now, so we'll explain this again. I think we've covered this before. Now we will have a better and deeper understanding of the creation of India. So there is transcendental self that we see on top. Okay, it is the top one. This represents the sentient nature of Bhagwanji. Consciousness itself, the consciousness principle. Okay, and this sits on top. Below him comes the insentient nature. Insentient nature is of 2 types. The first is the potential, the unmanifest, one which creates everything. So one that holds the potential. The potential, the unmanifest, the primal nature is basically the 3 gunas. Everything in this Maya is created out of these 3 gunas, Raj, Tam, and Sat. So they are at the top. This is when it is still unmanifest.
So just to highlight, the capital S self sits on top of.
Yeah, that's the transcendental self.
The transcendental self sits on top of the gunas, and it's the 3 gunas that create this Maya for us, right? And that's what, and even in that triangle, Satgun is the top, pointing towards the capital S self, right? And most of us probably have a very strong sense of Rajagun, Rajas. That's why in the Gita class, we always say, let's focus on the Sat qualities. Eventually, we need to even leave the Sat qualities to go to the capital S self. But I just wanted to highlight, it's the gunas that create the Maya.
Yeah. So Sat, Raj, and Tam are the unmanifest part of the insentient nature. Insentient because it has no life or consciousness of its own. So we have insentient nature, which is driven by the sentient nature. Now, once you've got the unmanifest potential, how does that unmanifest potential get manifest? So then once it gets manifest, it creates these other 20 things, of which 8 have been mentioned in Shloka 4. What are those 8 ones? Intellect, ego, and manas, the mind. Intellect is your determinative faculty, right? Buddhi. Ego, the distinguishing faculty, like we say, right? Ego is that barcode on every product in a grocery store, in a store, right? So ego is that distinguishing faculty, and mind is the contemplative faculty through which we think. There is a reason why each of these things have been put exactly in this order, right? So intellect always above ego and mind, always. Intellect should be driving ego and mind, which then drive the actual gross principles. So the 5 gross principles, the 5 major elements, they call the Mahabhut, the 5 Panch Mahabhut, right? What are those Panch Mahabhut? In succeeding orders of subtlety, the grossest form is earth, the solid state. Then the subtler than that is water, the liquid state. Subtler than that is fire, the energy state. Then subtler than that is gaseous state, which is air. And even subtler than that is space, Akash. Okay. Now, Akash or ether, as they say sometimes, right? So these 5 gross principles plus the 3 on top, these are the 8 major components of his insentient nature, which are manifest. Manifest from the 3 unmanifest principles that we talked about. Okay, so all these 8 are modifications of the top 3. So going back to the chemistry example, the top 3 are your periodic table. Everything below is a modification of these 3. Water is a modification of hydrogen and oxygen, right? Ozone is a modification of oxygen, like that, right? Now these 5 gross principles, then they have further modifications. How do these 5 gross principles create subtler principles for our senses of perception and senses of action? So subtle principles is sound. The sound we hear corresponds to the space. The touch, the sense of touch we have comes from the gaseous state, the air. The form we have corresponds to energy, the fire element. Okay, fire element is extremely essential for people to have forms, things to have forms. The taste is your liquid state, ras that we say, right? And when I say taste, right, the fluidity, taste is not just what we think of as taste of food, right? All of these things, if I get much deeper, which we won't in this class, has much, much deeper meaning, and it pervades a lot of things. So I'll just give you an example for taste. Taste or fluidity. Taste is taste of food, ras. The ras is also in the music that we hear, right? Ras is the ras of life. Without ras in life, the life becomes niras, depressive. So ras is an extremely important form of life. It is what gives beauty to life. So ras is there in food, ras is in music, ras is in all forms of art. Ras is the happiness of life. Ras is what gives fluidity to everything we do in our life, right? This is how you think about the subtle principles. And this is the same for form or effulgence or touch or sound or smell. Okay, so these are the subtle principles. Then they translate into how we experience the world through the senses of perception, and how we action in this world through our senses of action. Now, in terms of the 5 senses in the gross form that we see, there are 5 gross forms, right? When we think about science, we talk about 5 senses. And those are the 5 senses are eyes, nose, mouth, ears, and skin, right? Now, this 5 in Gita, the animate beings, it is divided into 2 parts. There is a sense of perception through which we experience, and then there is a corresponding action, inward and outward. So it is further divided into 2. So you get subtler. You're not just talking about these 5 gross, what do you call it? Like the senses that we talk of in science. You have to divide it further into the ability to perceive and the ability to act. There is a difference. And it's important to know that difference and be aware of that difference, because it is that difference, that gap between the two, awareness of which allows us to move from reaction to response. There is a gap between the two. We perceive, we process, we act. Okay, they are not the same. So these are the 23, the lower 23 names that you see here, 20 on the, those, what do you call it, the lines here, 20 flowcharts, and then the 3, intellect, ego, and manas. These are the 23 modifications, the physical modifications, the manifest forms of modifications of the 3 unmanifest potential, Raj, Tam, and Sat. Now there is like all of them are connected because they flow from each other. But it is different from the transcendental self. The sentient sense, the consciousness principle is what drives everything below it. It drives it, and yes, yet it is not connected, meaning it is not impacted or affected in any way by the 23 gross manifestations. Why is that important to note, and how do you visualize this? Imagine transcendental self, the consciousness principle, as the sun above. Everything below there is like imagine a car that is run on solar energy. So you have all these modifications that create this car. Unless it gets the solar energy, it will not move. It will remain insentient. It has no energy of its own. It has no ability to actually do something. So it is the insentient form. It stays there. The moment sun starts to power it, sun powers it with its energy, this entire thing starts to take a life of its own and starts to actually move. And when you see a car moving, you think, oh, car is moving. It is not moving on its own. It has no capacity without that consciousness principle on top. And what this car does when it is moving, whether it creates an accident, it creates a ruckus, or whether it transports people from one place to another safely, any of those actions of this car, even though it is driven by the power of the sun, that sun is unimpacted completely, and it is not taking any participation in the actions, the karmas, the results of this car. Okay. Let's read.
You want me to read the table too?
No, leave the table. Just read the remaining 3 constituents.
The remaining 3 constituents are subtler: the mind, the intellect, and the ego. The mind is always active in contemplation of one thing or the other. It is governed by the ego, which signifies faculty of differentiation. In this degenerate form, ego denotes pride, haughtiness, vanity, arrogance, or conceit. At the root of all the qualities lies the feeling of different from and superior to others, which is essential feature of ego.
So this is quite clear, but I do want to highlight that we should reflect upon these qualities: pride, haughtiness, vanity, arrogance, conceit, superiority of others, because this is how the ego manifests.
In the degenerate form.
In the degenerate form. So if these thoughts or emotions cross your mind, right, it is really important for you to do a check-in and ask yourself where you're operating from, because they've defined it for us. Yeah, the next paragraph, please.
The intellect, which signifies faculty of determination between several alternatives, is superior to ego. The intellect has extraordinary power to reflect divinity. When illumined by divinity, the intellect manifests the power to discriminate between the real and unreal.
So this is clear. I think we've talked about this.
This is what we always talk about, right? Where is your buddhi pointing towards? If it is looking upwards, whether it is looking downwards, when it is looking towards the mind and is being driven by the mind and the senses, it is Gandhari buddhi, Gandhari intellect, an intellect that has closed its eyes and is being driven by Dhritarashtra consciousness, Dhritarashtra Chetna. Dhritarashtra Chetna is what? The Chetna, the mind, which is being run by the gross principles, by the senses. They are the rulers. But if all we have to do is turn the intellect upwards, and then it changes from Gandhari intellect, Gandhari from, and moves away from Dhritarashtra consciousness to Krishna consciousness. And then it starts to reflect divinity, and then it starts to be in the driver's seat instead of mind and senses being in the driver's seat.
In the term mind are included 5 senses of action and the 5 senses of perception. Thus, in Sankhya system, the insentient nature is deemed to comprise of 23 constituents, namely 5 gross constituents, 5 tanmatras, 5 senses of action, 5 senses of perception, mind, ego, and intellect. These 23 constituents are thus included in eightfold insentient nature. For all details, commentary under Shloka 28, chapter 3.
So what is very clear and is that everything we experience through our senses and every action that we do through our speech, hands, feet, and our senses of action is controlled by the subtle body, right? So I may not like the taste of a particular vegetable to begin with because I just don't like the taste of it. But your intellect and your subtle body kicks in, governs that no, this is actually the right thing for you. And you eat it, you do it repetitively, and then your sense object falls in place where it starts saying, you know what, I actually like the taste of it. And then you start liking it. So everything that we experience as sense of perception or sense of action is directed by the intellect. So you could like, for example, horror movies. There's so many people I've met love watching horror movies, right? But when you come onto this path and when you think of purpose, when you think of strengthening your intellect with tattva gyan and more sattvic knowledge, that entire that entire ichha, that desire to watch the horror movies, chut jati hai. You just drop it, right? And this is the choice that we have to make on a daily basis. When we chase sensual objects, what is it that my subtle body really is craving? And can I realign that with higher purpose?
Yeah, and if you have to think about it from a chemical perspective, what happens physically gross in our body, right? We're all looking for dopamine kicks because that creates thrill, happiness, right? The difference is now, instead of getting cheap kicks out of cheap quality of dopamine, we're going for higher quality dopamine that has much longer lasting effect. So you're moving away from buying cheap plastic goods to much higher quality goods for doing the same thing. Basically, that's what happens. We move away from cheap thrills to much deeper form of bliss and happiness.
The sentient nature, superior to controlling the above mentioned insentient nature, is the Lord's sentient nature or life element, which denotes the individualized soul called Jivatma. This is subtler and more powerful than superior to insentient nature, and it alone sustains the creation of its entire world of objects, feelings, and thoughts.
Yes, Kavita, you had a question? You're on mute.
Yeah. Tuhina, I just wanted to know why they are connecting the gross principle and subtle principles to ego here in the picture.
I didn't get the question. What are they connecting?
You know, the in the picture, from the ego, there is a line like, you know, which comes, and then gross principle, subtle principle, or a division of, you know, it shows like it is a division of ego, right? So I just wanted to know.
No, it is not.
Because it is a distinguished faculty that decides how you have the understanding. Whatever knowledge that you gain, invariable to it, your ego determines how you are going to assimilate that information. That's the reason of that connectivity.
Okay, so basically, It does not exactly mean that they are just part of ego. Ego and man, they act together. Okay.
Right.
Man is actually considered, so it is not exactly correct the way it has been drawn. Man is actually considered the sixth sense. And it is unique because this sense is both a sense of perception and a sense of action. Everything that you see under the sense of perception, it eventually goes to man, and man perceives it, creates a sense of how it wants to react. You act in your man first, your mind acts first, and then your senses of action finally actually do that in the gross form. So
Right.
man is your sixth sense of perception, and man is what controls the other two. Okay. And basically this whole thing is showing that the 20 principles below are connected to the 20 the three subtle principles. So 20 below are physical, the three above are subtle principles, and there is a hierarchy in the subtle principles: intellect, ego, man. And that's it. And these three together will drive the 20 below.
Okay.
Yeah. So it does not just mean that ego is what is split into 20. Although it feels like as if it's drawn that way, but it's not really exactly that.
Thank you.
That help? Vijay, did you also understand that piece? You're right in what you're saying, that ego is because it's a distinguishing faculty. That means it comprises of everything physical, because everything that we have physical becomes a part of that distinction. It's an animal, it's a human being, this is the name and form is part of the distinguishing faculty, which is ego. But ego is the subtler form of that distinction, and the physical name and form we see is the gross manifestation of ego. Yeah. So what Vijay has said is also correct in terms of how the physical part of it is a reflection of ego as well. And we identify ourselves with that so much, right? End of the day.
Right. So just wanted to top it up with one thing. So there is a different culture, different this thing altogether. For example, for them, it could be a practice, or it could be, say, for example, a different music altogether, which we are not completely aware of. It could be just a noise to us. Without how my ego is going to process all the subtler elements to make me understand, that is going to be different from individual beings. So that is where I think it is all driven by. That's my understanding towards the flow of this chart.
So I'll say one addition there for the example that you gave, Vijay, that how you perceive and how you behave and how you will react to it will depend on the antahkaran of the person, right? Or what are the past impact, what is the past storehouse of memories you have created for yourself, and how that impacts your perception. Which means that it is not just ego that will determine how you interact with this new culture, new piece of music, but an entirety of intellect, ego, and man. And then there is another part to it, which is called chit. Chit is the storehouse of your memories, which connects deeply with actually man, because it is the unconscious principle inside of us, like the deep mind inside of us. That is what is chit. Okay, which is not shown here, and chit is a very deep subject, so we won't get into it. But basically that the difference in how everyone will behave towards it is not just ego, but also man and intellect, and also chit. All our prarabdhas before this, habits, experiences, learnings. Yeah.
Can I continue reading?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah, the above statement can be understood with help of an example. Let us take a potter who molds clay with his skill into the pots of different shapes. The clay which goes to constitute the pots can be taken to be an example of the insentient nature, and the potter's skill as sentient nature, which brings into existence pots of different types. Almighty God is at once the efficient and material cause of all creation. He is both the maker and the texture of immanent in all forms of creation. The above example of the potter is meant only to provide an idea of the elements of creation, but no example can fully explain the God and his creation, which is unique and infinite.
Perfect. I think we've talked about this already. So I think we'll stop here and then we'll start from Shloka 6 in the next class. After 6 and 7, basically, we will get into seeing Bhagwanji everywhere. Now we'll start to get into Vigyan, right? Till 6, we'll have some level of Gyan, and then 8 onwards, we will get into the Vigyan. Okay. So we close here. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll do the closing shlokas. I think we can do 6. Nana?
ॐ सर्वेषां स्वस्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां शान्तिर्भवतु सर्वेषां पूर्णं भवतु सर्वेषां मङ्गलं भवतु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतङ्गमय ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ पूर्णमद पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमिद उदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Thank you, Nana. Who would like to volunteer for next class for the invocation shlokas? Any takers?
I can do it, Tuhina.
Perfect. Thanks. Will.
So
Okay.
I do want to say one thing, right? So we all have been blessed with this book, right? And while the knowledge that is coming is straight from the spiritual source and Bhagwanji himself, the medium through which it has come is Mr. D.M. Sinha in Nanaji, right?
The author of the book.
The author of the book, right? So, and we may or may not have the blessing in this life to meet him, to give him back, to express our gratitude for the sadhana he's done and for the effort it's taken for him to write this book, right? That's been his seva to all of us, and his seva that has helped thousands around the world, right? So it's his 100th birthday on Tuesday, right? So while Aparna Didi suggested that read the entire Gita, the shlokas, or if possible, otherwise read parts of it, I would say please take up this seva as a way to pay the respect back to Nanaji. He's done a lot of effort. We are gaining a lot because of his effort. Let this be a little bit of a payback in terms of bhav, in terms of reverence back to him for all the effort that he's done for us. That would be my humble request. Either you read a chapter, either you read a few shlokas, whatever it is, but do it with his blessing, with his grace, and for his uddhar.
And so the date is Tuesday, 17th May, and the offerings will be done for him from 9:30 to 11:30 p.m. And we're going to treat this as the Sadhana Yog Divas. So everybody will try and, whoever can, just try and read whatever you can, whatever sadhana you can do will be a way to, yeah, like I said, pay respects to Nanaji. It's his birthday.
Great. Otherwise, enjoy your long weekend.
Narayan, Narayan, everyone.
Narayan, Narayan.
Narayan, you guys too have a good
Narayan.
weekend.
Yeah, happy
Thank
weekend.
Happy weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.